Hi, Dr. Ali Parsa. Um, if you can, let me just see. Are you with us?
I am with you, and thank you so much for having me today. And my apologies for being a little bit late. I work in a technology company, and sometimes you think I'm the worst Luddite. I couldn't figure out my Wi-Fi. I apologize.
No problem at all. I just, first, before starting, I'd like to ask if you prefer to be called Ali or addressed as Ali or Dr. Parsa.
Oh my gosh, certainly, Ali. I mean, my mother, no, Ali is more than enough. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. I'm going to be interviewing you today, or have the honor to do so. My name is Fatma, and I'm going to be asking you a couple of questions about your life in the UK, coming here and starting with Babylon, and then ending with hopefully some advice that you could provide refugees, and in particular those who are potentially planning to or thinking of starting a business. So without further ado, Ali, could you tell us about yourself and your background and how you actually arrived to the UK?
Certainly. I mean, I don't think it's that dissimilar to any other person who had to be dislocated from their home. I was lucky enough to be born in one of the most loving, wonderful families. I was a middle-class kid, doing well, having a brilliant life. And so many of us, or so many, sometimes we forget that those foundational years, almost who was mom and dad, and how did they treat you, and the genes you were given, and the environment in which you could create your first formative years, almost decide 90% of your life, frankly, right? And I was incredibly lucky to have that. And then when I was a teenager, the revolution in my country happened, and I was on the wrong side of it, of the political kind of things. And as a kid, you get involved in stuff, and the universities got closed, so I had to leave. I was 16 when I walked from Iran to Pakistan, and then eventually found my way to England. And you know, like every other refugee, everything changes, right? You're 16. I didn't speak any language. I was the kind of person you see on a road and you say, "What time is it?" And I would say, "Very well, thank you." You know, I mean, I didn't speak any English, and didn't have much any other connection. But you learn, and you stand up, and you figure it out. And the thing I figured out, and it was, I mean, I think. I think Malcolm Gladwell calls it a desirable difficulty. It's one of those things that is incredibly hard when it happens. It actually teaches you that everything will be fine at the end. You know, I mean, and it was great, and I wouldn't change it for the world. And I was lucky enough to land in Britain, and the community really was fantastic. I mean, I can't fault it. I mean,
Yeah, that's great to hear that you've thrived on such a challenge, and I really want to touch a little bit on that, which is telling us about your experience integrating into a new country and its culture, especially with the fact that you had little to no English. How did you make it?
you know, Fatma, um, part of it is the resilience you learn as a child, but part of it is just the sheer kindness of people to help you on the way, right? We always remember the stories of somebody who's had been treated badly, and that's true. But for every one bad treatment, I was treated brilliantly by others. I mean, I give you a very simple story I always use. Like when I left my father, like my father walked with me all the way to a town near the border. And then I was leaving, I came to hug my dad, and the smugglers said, "You can't hug each other. People that are full of spice here, they'll see that." So my father kind of raises his hand, and just lost him to COVID. But he raises his hand and shakes my hand, and he pushed it really hard. And those of you who are parents can imagine that. And at the time, there's no mobile phone. Who knows whether you'll ever see your kid again? He just says to me, "Just stay safe, son, until we see each other again." And I walk away, and within half an hour, I get arrested. That's how well I could keep my promise and how useless I was. Because we get at the border, the guy take a look at me and say, "You're not who you pretend to be. You're clearly something else. So they arrested me. And of course, there were so many spies. Clearly, I behaved badly on the way or wrongly. And at the time, it was the Iran-Iraq war. And these kids that used to get arrested would be sent to the border. And they fundamentally walk the mines, right? And your chance of survival was tiny. It was almost non-existent. And I thought, okay, that's it. And I failed the one promise I made, right? And at that moment, some guy shows up, runs around, and says to this Revolutionary Guard, brother, could you, there's a phone call for you. There was no mobile phone at the time. Could you go to the office? So the guy says to him, watch this kid until I come back. As soon as he goes, this guy says to me, son, run. That's the border, run. And I ran. That man, who I never met before, I have never met since, and I have no idea what happened to, saved my life, right? And changed the course of my life out of nothing but the kindness of his heart, right? And I can tell you 100 stories of my life that this happened, right? And that's the reality we forget. We always think it's about us. It's always about everybody else's and how they helped us to get where we are. So it was hard, but it was made possible because of the kindness of humanity.
That's really good to hear, and I'm sorry for the loss of your father last year.
Thank you.
Um, so I wanted to also ask. Well, we're gonna touch a little bit on your life at the start in the UK. So after you managed to come here safely, and I assume that you started looking for ways where you can learn English. Did you seek to find employment, or did you go for education first? If you can tell us a little bit about the start of the journey here.
So I went for education, and it was possible because of the welfare state we have, right? And and I was like many others. I was very depressed when you arrive, right? And I didn't really speak any English, and I didn't have any cultural connection. And I was 16. And I thought that if I want to learn English for 6 months, I said you have to go to a college to learn English for 6 months to a year. Then it's 2 years of O levels at the time, which is GCSE now. Then it's 2 years of A levels, and you do the math, and you think you're in 21 before you even get to university, which at the time sounds like disaster. So I basically locked myself in a house on my own, and basically I learned the English on my own, and then I learned the O levels, and then passed that in a few months, and then the A levels. So I could get to university at the time. And I tell you, I was so out of it and so disconnected that I got an offer to join Cambridge and an offer to join UCL. And I basically looked at Cambridge and said, that's a tiny little town. How can that be better than a big city like London? So I went to the big city. That's how we sometimes forget that very basic things that we know in our society, somebody with none of those connections knows. And it's not just to refugees, a family, kid who comes from a family who the parents don't have an access to understanding those things, don't know. So I went through education, but throughout my universities, I got grants. Before that, I got welfare. And the government in the first 10 years of my life when I was here, I spent a lot. And then in the first year of employment, I paid more taxes than all the money they spent on me, right? And that's the way it is, right? There's a myth to look at our first 2-3 years and say we are a burden. I think one of the great jobs, I was reading the biography of a great friend who unfortunately passed away some time ago, Jeremy Haywood. His wife has written a wonderful biography on him. And in there, they talk about the report that at the very early years of the Tony Blair government, they wrote on the effect and impact of refugees on UK. And I think that report, being almost 20 years old, is still as true today as it was then.
I'm glad that that report has been issued, and you are one of the great examples that refugees are never going to be a burden in any country. In fact, they add to it. So thank you so much for being very inspiring already. So
Thank you.
I would love to move forward and ask you about Babylon. I've read about it, but I want you to tell us about how the idea of your business came about. story?
So I built a chain of hospitals. After college, I didn't have any money, so I had to build. When I was doing my PhD, I built a company on the side to pay for the PhD. And when I sold that company, when my PhD finished, I saw the investment bankers who sold it for me per hour of work. They just, I mean, there was no comparison of how much they made versus how much I made. They were wearing suits, they talked beautifully, they looked beautiful, I mean, as men and women. And I thought maybe I want to be part of these guys, right? So I applied to investment banks having no idea how I can be an investment bank. Eventually I became one. And I hated it. I didn't like it. And I didn't hate it because I have anything against bankers or none of that kind of nonsense. I hated it because I love building things. And banking or consulting is very much project based, right? So that was the part I didn't like. So after a few years, when my first child was born, it gave me an excuse to quit. And I decided that I want to be a father full time and just bring up my daughter. 6 months of Gaga Google later, I decided this is the hardest job I've ever done, and it just wasn't for me. I just think people underestimate how hard and how lonely and how difficult sometimes it is bringing up a child. And so I was doing a series of knee operations because I used to do a lot of sports and I had problems picked up on my knee. So I wanted to correct that. And then I saw how bad the hospitals are, right? Even the private hospitals I was in. So I thought I can do better. And we built a chain of hospitals, which today is UK's largest chain of private hospitals. But then I noticed I was solving the wrong problem, because in average, you go to a hospital once every 20 years. And it's rare. And so we thought, can we make most of the healthcare most people need accessible and affordable and put it in the hands of everybody? Knowing what we know about technology and knowing what we know about healthcare, can we fix this problem? And I think we're making good efforts. Like, look, we deliver now in UK 24/7. You can talk to a doctor within minutes or hours. Uh, um, uh, at the time that normally you had to wait a few weeks to talk to a GP or a thing, and you were only open for a few things. And then NHS just published the peer-reviewed paper that shows actually our patients are about 35% cheaper and among the happiest in the country compared to other cohorts of similar patients. But what is really interesting to me is we took that model to Rwanda, one of the poorest countries in the world, and we delivered exactly the same results there. And then we took it to United States, to the boot hills of Missouri, one of the most deprived areas of United States, helping people on Medicaid that everybody thought it just cannot be done. And the results are the same there too, right? So I'm really proud of what my fellow Babylonians are doing in solving one of the world's biggest problems, right? I mean, a lot of entrepreneurs come to try and figure out how do you deliver pizza faster. But I think the world has so many significant challenges, and there are so many, and all we got to do is just put our brain on it and not try to solve it in 18 months, but try and solve it over an 18-year period. It'll get done.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that story. So if I understood correctly, you studied at university and then you got a job in banking, and then from there you've got like a series of unfortunate events, and that's when you came to starting Babylon. Did I get that one correct? Amazing. It's interesting how you can find an idea from just something wrong happening to you, sadly. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your experience in setting up a business. As you may be already aware, a lot of refugees, coming in from their countries where they know how the laws and the country works, when they move to another country like the UK, there's a little bit of an intimidation, maybe that things are going to be too difficult, how are they going to get the money. So, what was your experience like?
Look, it's hard, right? Even when I became an investment banker, I remember walking on the floors on the first day of my job, right? And I was the only non-white face in that entire floor, right? There was no one else, right? Not one, right? We're talking a long time ago, 95, right? 96 time period. Thankfully, things have changed. Um, and when I was, for instance, at another bank, the entire time my boss used to call me Alibaba, and he used to introduce me to people as Alibaba, right? I mean, and he thought it was cute, but I mean, you and I know it's just
Yeah.
right. So you had to deal with that. That's fine. But as I said, you can't focus on this stuff. What you need to focus on is where it is. And people say, but it's tough for refugees. But you forget what they had to go through, right? The other day I was listening to an interview, it's about a couple of years ago, of a woman. She has walked from Eritrea across, found a thing in one of the Gulf states, was she described almost enslaved for 2 to 3 years. On a trip to Cyprus, she runs away from her employer, right? She then walks from Cyprus to Greece all the way to the border to Calais to try and make it to UK, right? Over a 2 year period, right? Can you, and then that person arrives in UK. You really think she's going to finding a job in here or building a business in here a challenge compared to what she did? Can you think of a better job interview, like, or a challenge than what she had to go through to get into here, right? If you were going to design the most difficult challenge to find the most determined, tenacious people to get here, she passed that already, right? So I think we underestimate the resourcefulness of the people who made it here. And that's why I think in the same way that very same group have made America great when they first migrated. I mean, I see in the group Paul is in here. I mean, just look at the contribution that the Jewish community made after Second World War because of the dislocation into the Western countries. And what they have done across all areas, from Nobel Prize scientists to artists to financiers to doctors, right? I mean, that's what these communities bring. That's the DNA that you import into your countries. Just give it the same period of time, a generation or two, and see what the kids and the grandchildren of these immigrants will do. I just think that we always talk about it as if we're doing charity when we let people in. We're not. We're actually importing an incredible DNA into our countries. And I mean, just look at the Ismaili community when they were dislodged out of Uganda, and look at the contribution they're making, right?
Absolutely. I know that Babylon is a tech-based business, and it has obviously the side where it's actually serving individuals and communities and giving people access to healthcare. And I was just listening to a podcast where you were interviewed in about how you felt about tech and if you enjoyed the tech part more than the entrepreneurial part. So I'd like you to tell us a little bit about, the tech side of Babylon and what your thoughts are for the future of tech.
Look, technology is a tool, right? Uh, in our sector, 50% of the world population has no access to healthcare. 5 out of 7 billion people have no access to surgery, right? So this idealistic model that I have my local family doctor, I go, she knows everything about me and my family and is always available to me. Even if it was true where we live, it simply doesn't exist for 50% at least of the world population. And we are so short of humans, doctors, nurses. There is no model in the world that says we can train enough to help people. So how do we do it? Right? So the way to do it is to figure out what are the needs of people and see can the machines do that. So for instance, when we develop artificial intelligence that can take your symptoms and say what's wrong with you potentially and what you should do about it, it's not because we love technology. It's because what other way is there to allow people in Rwanda, which after the genocide lost a very big chunk of its doctors and clinicians populations, to deal with that, right? And see people. So that's why you do technology, because of what it'll do, not because of the love of the process.
Yeah, it's simply the language of the future for sure. Um,
And I think there will be a time,
mm,
whether that's 10 years, 100 years, I don't know, but where artificial intelligence can do so much of the stuff that we need, right? That robotic surgeries can do so much of the stuff we need, that this problem will, and now we will have other problems and other issues, but I can't see anytime soon, at least, where a machine can put its hand on your shoulder and say, trust me, I will fix you, right? So there is a room for the human and the machine to work together to make it work, right? But there is also, like everything else, there is danger with technology too, right? Those who figured out the powers of atomic structure of a molecule were not planning to create atomic bombs, right? I mean, some technology, things can go really wrong with it too. And artificial intelligence can be a serious problem as well as a serious aid. And it's up to us humans on how we choose it, to decide it, govern it, use it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much, Ali. I would love to ask more questions and have more time with you because, again, you're sharing such incredible pieces of advice, and just your experience is very rich. So I will unfortunately have to wrap it up with one last question, which is, what are your final thoughts? Anything that you want to share, especially for refugees who had recently been through a similar journey, or wanting again to start their lives in the UK, or those who have been here but are still stuck in a sense, but they do aspire to do more.
I think a lot of the people on this group are people who work with refugees rather than refugees, I guess. And a lot of your membership are. And I just want to thank them. Honestly, I am one of the people you were helping. And I wouldn't be here without people like you. Even when I arrived in UK, I was immediately deported. The immigration officer told me, you gotta go. It was a charitable organization who said, he's a kid, you can't let him go right now. He needs to have one night. And I just told the person, let me go now, because what's the one night? He said, if you stay one night, you're here, right? And it was them who figured it out how I stay, right? So thank you for all you do. I mean, look, I leave you with one simple thing, and you know this better than anybody else. I was a middle-class kid, and I became a poor kid. I was a native. I became an immigrant. I was young. I'm much older now. It really doesn't matter whether I was rich, poor, young, old, an immigrant, or a native. What I found is that these communities I was with, they all had the same needs, the same desires. They just had different opportunities. And what you do is you're equalizing those opportunities. And for that, I couldn't be more grateful to you. And I say that as somebody who benefited from what you do. And I know what you do is hard. And every day you face challenges doing what you do. But I'm grateful to you. Thank you so much for what you do.
Thank you so much for this and for your time, Ali. I